Welcome back, folks, to another Archetype review. I'm Frizz, and today we're going to be talking about the Duelist Dedication from the Advanced Player's Guide. The Duelist is all about fancy weapon tricks, focusing on a single target, and defending yourself and others. It gives access to a bunch of different fighter feats in addition to its own interesting feats, and one of those feats is probably one of the most interesting feats I've ever seen in an archetype. Without further ado, let's just get into things. The Duelist Dedication is honestly quite simple, and it's actually great for basically every single martial character. It only requires that you're trained in light armor and simple weapons, which is basically all martial characters, and it ensures that you're always ready for a duel. You then get the Quick Draw feat, which allows for you to draw a weapon and attack as a single action. Quick Draw is an amazing feat that is normally only restricted to the Gunslinger, Ranger, and Rogue classes, and this is by far the easiest way to get it on basically any other class. The ability to draw a weapon and attack will save you a lot of actions, especially if you weren't expecting to get into a fight in the first place. Do keep in mind, though, that you can only use Quick Draw with a normal strike, meaning that if you have some other type of action that only takes one action and is a strike, but it isn't, a strike, then you can't use Quick Draw with it. At level 4, duelists can take the Dueling Parry feat, which is normally a fighter and swashbuckler feat. For those classes, this feat isn't nearly as good to take here, because fighters get this at level 2 and swashbucklers can take it at level 1, so taking it at level 4 is a little bit weird for those classes, but for everyone else it's pretty dang good. It allows for you to spend an action whenever you're wielding a weapon in one hand and your other hand is free to defend yourself, giving yourself a +2 circumstance bonus to AC until the start of your next turn. This is basically equivalent to raising a shield, though you can't shield block. Also, a bunch of feats later in this archetype require that you have Dueling Parry, so I really recommend getting it for that reason, not just because of its great defensive utility. Duelist Challenge is a rather unusual level 4 feat that gives you bonuses when fighting against a single target while giving you penalties against everyone else. For a single action, you challenge someone that you can see, and then they are your dueling opponent until they are defeated, flee, or the encounter ends for whatever reason. Anytime that you hit them with a one-handed melee weapon while your other hand is free, you get a circumstance bonus to the damage equal to the number of damage dice that your weapon deals. Due to how focused you are on this single target though, you do take a penalty on damage rolls equal to the number of damage dice whenever you fight literally anyone else. This bonus to damage is alright, and it will certainly add up over the course of a campaign, but adding somewhere between 1 and 4 damage per hit isn't exactly earth-shattering. Also, the penalty on damage rolls against everyone else isn't actually as bad as it seems when you think about it. In my experience, there are generally two types of combats in Pathfinder 2e. They're going to be fights with one super dangerous enemy, or fights against a bunch of lower level enemies. In the second type of fight, you aren't really going to have to worry about the bonus to damage or the penalty to damage as much, since the enemies that you're going to be fighting are going to have smaller amounts of health, and generally, really to use this feat to its fullest, it would take a lot of actions, but you don't have to for those types of fights. And for the first type of fight where you're fighting one creature, that's literally what this feat was designed for, so you don't have to deal with the penalty at all. Also, just as a side note that I find kind of weird, is you can technically challenge more than one target at once, as you aren't restricted to having a single dueling opponent at a single time, so that's a way to deal with the penalty if you're fighting against multiple people. Even though that does cost actions, and you can only challenge one person per turn due to it having the open trait. Overall, I feel like this feat is amazing both flavor-wise and mechanically, and if you want to make the most of it, I really recommend using an agile weapon to be able to attack people more and more and get that damage bonus more and more. Disarming Stance is a fighter feat that requires that you're trained in athletics and that you only have one weapon in one hand and that the other hand is free. But once you are able to actually use it, it's pretty good. While you're in this stance, which takes a single action to enter, you hold your weapon in such a way that improves your control over it, giving you a +1 circumstance bonus on athletics checks to disarm opponents, and a +2 circumstance bonus on your reflex DC when defending against people trying to disarm you of your weapon. Also, you can try and disarm creatures that are up to 2 size categories larger than you. For a medium creature, this means that you can try and disarm a huge creature, and if you get enlarged, then you can try and disarm a gargantuan one. Overall, this stance really improves the disarm action, though I don't know if it completely covers my issues with it. Disarming is generally really hard to pull off, and to actually get the weapon out of someone's hands, you have to critically succeed, which isn't really all that likely. A +1 bonus will help you get that critical success, but it will still be fairly unlikely. Selfless Parry is a Duelist exclusive upgrade to the Dueling Parry feat, and it allows for you to protect all of your friends with your weapon, or at least all of your friends who are adjacent to you. While you're benefiting from Dueling Parry, allies who are next to you get a +1 circumstance bonus to their AC, and if you have Dueling Riposte, which is the next feat I'm talking about, then you can also use it whenever someone critically fails an attack against an ally who is within your reach. This is a really fun feat, though how powerful it will be depends greatly on your party composition. If you're the only frontline character, then this gets a lot worse, as you probably won't have many allies around you to protect. But if you're with let's say a champion who's nearby, or a barbarian, and you're always next to each other, then you can really help each other out. Do keep in mind though that if you're with a rogue, they're probably going to be trying to get into a flank, and probably are not going to be adjacent to you to get the benefit. Despite that, it is still a great feat that can add some really interesting synergies within the party, and is overall just very, very fun. I said that I'd talk about Dueling Riposte next, so let's do it. Dueling Riposte is yet another fighter feat that the Duelist gets access to, and it is pretty dang specific, but it's still pretty good. As a reaction, whenever someone within your reach critically fails trying to hit you while you're benefiting from Dueling Parry, and this is any attack where they critically fail, including spells and ranged attacks, you can attempt a strike or disarm against them. How useful this is depends a lot on how your GM will play. If they frequently use all 3 of their actions just swinging at you, then it's pretty amazing, since they're much more likely to critically miss if they spend all 3 actions and swing whenever their multiple attack penalty is at its max. If they play a bit more strategically though, then it will come up a bit less often, as they will be less likely to critically miss you. There are a few feats coming up though that do improve on this action a lot, so keep in mind that it will be getting quite a bit better. Continuing the theme of there being a lot of fighter feats in this archetype, Disarming Twist is a rather interesting one, and in some ways it's actually better than the normal disarm action. You have to be trained in athletics to take it, and then for a single action with a press trait, you make an attack against someone. In addition to the normal effects of this strike, it has the success and critical success effects of the disarm action. Additionally, on a failure, the target is flat-footed until the end of your current turn. I have mixed feelings about this feat for multiple reasons. The upside of it is that there's a lot more ways to increase your attack rolls and reduce enemy AC than there is for increasing your athletics checks or your target's reflex DCs. So in general, I believe that it'll be harder to actually critically succeed with an athletics check than it would be to critically succeed on an attack roll. So even with multiple attack penalty accounted for, I still think you might be a little bit easier off trying to critically succeed with Disarming Twist than with a normal disarm action. The downside of this feat though is mainly the press trait, which means that you can only use this action whenever you're suffering from a multiple attack penalty. This drastically reduces your chance of critically succeeding, although you can offset it a bit with an agile weapon or by being a flare ranger, or both, but press actions are generally way worse for people who aren't fighters with their really high attack bonuses. Also, this is just a side note, is applying flat-footed for the rest of the turn whenever you miss isn't really all that impactful, considering that you almost certainly are not going to be hitting them again, even with them being flat-footed, considering that you're at a maximum multiple attack penalty. So it's just a little bit weird. I mentioned earlier that there's one feat in this archetype that is incredibly special, and now we finally get to talk about it. Student of the Dueling Arts is a fascinating feat with 2 different equally interesting effects. First, during your daily preparations, you can swap out any duelist feats that you have for any other duelist feats that you qualify for. except for, of course, you can't change the Duelist Dedication or this feat, the Student of the Dueling Arts. Essentially, you can pick and choose exactly what you want from this archetype every single day, and you get to think about it on a day-to-day basis. This is really great, and in a way, it is just allowing you to pick and choose exactly what you want and how you want to combat threats during the day. The second part of this feat is that you can enter a stance that you would normally need a Duelist archetype feat to get, even if you don't have the feat, simply by increasing the number of actions that you need to use by 1, which for every single stance that this feat allows you to access means that you are spending 2 actions instead of 1. Combining both of these functions together makes you an incredibly customizable character that can really do pretty much everything in this archetype whenever you want to do it. Also, I'm just going to throw this out here that I want to see a whole class at some point built around the idea of having a bunch of stances with huge bonuses and downsides, but I'm going to be covering that in a different video coming up at some point soon. Speaking of duelist stances though, Dueling Dance is a fighter and swashbuckler feat, and it makes Dueling Parry so much better. While in this stance, you constantly get the benefits of Dueling Parry without ever actually having to spend an action, outside of, the one to enter the stance. Effectively, while you have a hand free, you have a 2 higher AC, and you can use Dueling Riposte anytime without having to worry about having Dueling Parry up. It's a great way to improve your defenses, and want to know the best part? You don't even have to have the damn feat if you have Student of the Dueling Arts, so you can just use 2 actions instead of 1 and just pretend that you have the feat for a bit. Improvised Dueling Riposte is one of the aforementioned improvements to the Dueling Riposte action, and you can now get an additional reaction every single turn that you can only use to make a Dueling Riposte. And on top of that, this Dueling Riposte doesn't even require you to be using Dueling Parry. This means that you will always be able to use Dueling Riposte, no matter the circumstances, so long as someone critically misses you while they're within your reach. This really improves your odds of being able to use Dueling Riposte, and allows you to use other reactions and never miss the chance to use it. Do keep in mind though, that if you're not using Dueling Parry or something like that, then the odds of you actually being able to use the trigger of someone critically missing you is a lot less likely, considering how they will, your AC isn't gonna be as good, so people are a lot less likely to actually critically miss you. Guiding Riposte is the final feat in the Duelist archetype, and it is a pretty nice one. While you use Dueling Riposte, you can make your stumble foe and kind of slide off of you, moving them 10 feet into another space that is within your reach, so long as you hit them with your Dueling Riposte. As this is forced movement, this movement doesn't trigger any reactions, meaning you can't just hit them again if you have an attack of opportunity, but it's still amazing. You can just slide people into or out of flanks, or just into any other position that you want. Also, if you're using a one-handed reach weapon, like a whip, then you can move them so they're no longer in, so you are no longer in their reach, and they then have to approach you to try and hit you again. Generally speaking, this is just an incredible feat with a lot of different uses, and as long as you have a good AC, this is wonderful. Overall, I love the idea of this archetype, and some of its mechanical implementation really stands out as being unique. Student of the Dueling Arts is one of my favorite archetype feats, period, and honestly I want to see it expanded and, have a bit more mechanical bite to it. As it is, the Duelist only has 2 stances that they can use with Student of the Dueling Arts, and I feel like it'd be a really interesting kind of way to play the game to add additional stances, and I said earlier that I would like to see that expanded into an entire class, and I'm serious about that. It is a very interesting idea for a character, and I'd like to see it, I'd like to see it a bit more fleshed out. The one nitpick that I do have about the Duelist is that it only has 4 unique feats to this archetype, while the other 7 are from the fighter. It makes it feel a little bit weird to take the Duelist archetype on a fighter, since they could get most of the feats a few levels earlier. thanks for watching. This has been a very interesting video to make, kind of a blast from the past, since interestingly enough, the Duelist was the first archetype I ever read through in 2E. I didn't end up taking it for my character in the end, but it's still really fascinating. If you have any constructive criticism, I would love to hear it. I'm still figuring out this new mic, and it is hell recording in a cold, so who knows how my voice sounds right now. Anyways, until I see you next, live a wonderful life.